And our guest on C-SPAN's Newsmakers this week is Congressman Ron Paul of Texas, who has just been named the chair of the Subcommittee on Domestic Monetary Policy with the incoming Congress. He's joining us from the Capitol. And our questioners for Newsmakers are Sudeep Reddy of the Wall Street Journal and Robin Harding of the Financial Times. Gentlemen, thanks to both of you. We're obviously going to talk with the congressman about his interest as the subcommittee chair. But before we get to that, Congressman Paul, I wanted to ask you a political question, which is, if in fact this tax package passes, what, if any, political implications will there be for the people who elected the Republican House majority?
You know, it's so confusing, and there's some pluses and minuses on both sides of this argument, and it really has split a lot of the conservatives. I happen to be in favor of the tax package. I don't want taxes to go up, but there's talk right now at the present time of even changing it more, and so we don't know what exactly will be in the final vote. But I don't think this can be the litmus test to decide whether or not the new Congress, especially in the House, will be considered, at fault. I think that remains to be seen.
Well, Sudeep Reddy, let's turn to the new Congress and your questions.
Dr. Paul, I first wanted to start off with a kind of an overview of what do you hope to accomplish as chairman of this subcommittee, and what does it mean to you to have somebody who actually wants to end the central bank actually overseeing it?
Well, I will continue to do exactly what I've been doing. I just have a better audience with a little more authority to do it. I've been talking about the danger of central economic planning through the Federal Reserve for as long as I can remember, especially since the early 70s. But this gives me a better platform, and the fact that I wrote a book that said, "End the Fed," actually, the book is pretty modest in its proposal in that I explain all the fallacies of the monetary system that we have. I don't attack individuals as much as the system, especially since 1971. And my ultimate proposal there, as it has been over the years, even back in the 80s with the Gold Commission, was just allow us to have competition. If the dollar is a good currency to operate with, let's just allow gold and silver to circulate. But today, if you use gold and silver as legal tender in payment of debt, as the Constitution says, you could go to jail for this. So we are compelled by law to use depreciating money, and therefore who wants to save money for 20 years if the money might be worth 1/3 of what it is when you put it away? So it's a system that is doomed to fail. We're in the process of seeing that come about. We've had the financial crisis. We're in the middle of that, and that was predictable. And also those individuals who predicted the problems that we have today are predicting that this is going to get a lot worse.
So, Congressman Paul, what specific things would you like to achieve in the next Congress? What's success for you over the next 2 years?
I think the most important thing is more transparency. We essentially have none. We got a token effort for the Fed to report a little more detail on what the lending agencies did during the bailout period. And they've released $3.3 trillion that they've injected into the economy, but it's incomplete. It doesn't tell us what the collateral was and who exactly. They did release some names, but there are a lot of unanswered questions. I think I should be top of the list on finding out exactly what they did, but then to continue with the audit effort. I had 320 co-sponsors last year or this current year, and we have new people coming in who are more anti-Fed than the current group of people. So I think we're going to keep that alive, and the American people understand transparency is very important, and I get strong support from the grassroots of America for this.
Congressman, in this recent release that you're talking about that came this month, we've actually found out of that $3 trillion, we found out that there were big banks that received the money, investment banks, foreign central banks. Do you have a problem with that? We obviously know about it, but what's the issue there that you don't like about having this money be used in this way?
Well, yeah, I have a big problem with it because, it was thought at one time in our history that all appropriations would go through the Congress. We would authorize and appropriate, and the Congress would control it. But this is all off the books. This is secret. The Fed prints their own money, creates the credit, and they spend it. Their budget's bigger than ours now. And And the people who get bailed out are the ones who are in the political know. They say that what I want might politicize the Fed. How could it be more political if certain interests are, some companies were bailed out and some were left to go bankrupt? Lehman went bankrupt. Goldman Sachs were treated pretty well. So we need this information. Those individuals who benefited the most from the bubble formation in the housing and other bubbles that were formed, they're the ones who got overextended. They were ready to go bankrupt, so they screamed and hollered and said, the end of the world's coming unless you bail out the banks. So we ended up buying that stuff. The Fed owns these illiquid assets. The American people, the workers, are suffering. They lost their jobs and they can't pay their mortgages and they're losing their homes. So it's a very, very unfair system. It's bad economics and it's really not legal under the Constitution.
I want to go back to your suggestion that you now have a more or less a bigger megaphone with the subcommittee chairmanship. And maybe you can tell us what your understanding of is how far the Republican leadership is willing to go with your investigation of the Fed. When you've talked with Chairman Baucus, incoming Chairman Baucus, for example, what are you in concert with the direction that you're taking the subcommittee, and will you receive support from him as it moves to full committee level?
I'm working on the assumption that I will. I mean, the conversations I've had with the chairman, basically said you're in charge of that subcommittee. Now, that doesn't mean that, the first week in January, I send over a subpoena for Bernanke and demand that he come over with a pile of papers. I don't think that would be logical. But to start sending requests to even their accountants and other people and say, this is what I want, and to see what happens, because there's a lot of information that under current law now, because the law has been changed, and we want at least that. And then they can still hide behind the law if I want to demand every transaction with foreign banks. So in a way, it's enlightening to know that they bailed out a foreign central bank, but they deal with foreign central banks and foreign governments even before the bailout was occurring. But that is one set of information that they cling to, and so I will continue to work on that. But it's to the American people's benefit for us to know who's getting bailed out.
Congressman, doesn't the US benefit from the dollar being used as a global currency? And if the Fed doesn't lend to foreign central banks when they need money, how can the dollar remain a global currency?
Well, the market will determine that. Ultimately, the market is much more powerful than the Fed. I complain about the Fed and all, but just think of how we tried to prop up the dollar in the 60s and early 70s. We said, yes, the dollar's as good as gold. It's $35 an ounce, until the market overwhelmed and said the Bretton Woods is dead. It was the market that did that. They didn't come to their senses and do that. So, yes, we get tremendous benefits, and nobody wants to really talk about it because they know it. Until now, they're starting to recognize that people around the world are getting a little bit skittish about the dollar. And now the response to our easing isn't giving us the same results. With this newly announced easing, interest rates have gone up. They haven't gone down. So there's a limit to what the Fed can do. They're supposed to be in charge of unemployment, and they wonder, well, they should have had that mandate or not. What difference does it make? They give us an unemployment rate, according to the Treasury, it's over 17%. According to the free market economists, it's over 22%. So their policies are failing, and that's becoming more evident every day.
Congressman, when you and I have talked in the past, you've acknowledged that the Fed has been able to moderate the business cycle, and that we would have some sharper ups and sharper downs in the economy if not for a central bank. I wanted to get at that idea a little bit more. What would a world, an economy run by Ron Paul look like, and how would that actually play out to real people in terms of being able to access credit and being able to function in an economy like we have now?
Well, if you didn't have fiat money, you would have reasonably stable prices, although that is not the goal of having stable prices. You want free market pricing. But if you had a stable dollar, that's what you want, a stable currency, one that cannot be manipulated, and you want interest rates to be determined by the marketplace. And under these conditions, it's virtually impossible to have boom-bust cycles. You would have some prices going up. Weather still might have an influence on farm commodity prices and those kind of things, but you don't have a whole economy. Just think we had a housing bubble, but that just didn't affect housing. That affected everything, banking and so many other things, and stocks as well. So you wouldn't have that if you didn't have this artificial manipulation of credit. And to me, the greatest sin, economic sin, that is committed by doing this is ruining the market signal about what the consumer and the businessman must do, and that's the interest rates. If you got rid of prices in our economy, like wage and price controls, like we did in 1971, it's become socialistic, and that's why socialism always failed. But we regulate by prices 1/2 of our economy because we control the money supply and the interest rates, and that is the source of our problem.
Now, I want to follow up on that point. You mentioned bubbles. Before the Fed was created in 1913, we had bubbles for centuries in not only the U.S. economy, but other economies around the world. Wouldn't you still have bubbles, and wouldn't they be just as troublesome as they are now?
They would be very narrow, but the only time we had bubbles in the 19th century is when we abused the standard. It was never immune from local banks inflating, and they certainly did that on occasion. Certainly during our Civil War period, there was tremendous inflation. They went off the gold standard, but they were forced to retrench because they still believed in the Constitution, and they had the Resumption Act of 1776, and we went back to a gold standard, quit printing money, and then we ushered in a great growth period, one of the greatest in our history, in the latter part of the 19th century until World War I started. So no, the Federal Reserve provides no real benefits to us long term.